At 1 o'clock?
Hi, Jim, can you hear me?
How are you? Oh, I thought you.
Perfect.
Are we all ready? Or anyone waiting? No. We gotta get started, so Jake can join in the chorus when we come through the second time.
Correct.
Okay, so I am at this point gonna call to order the May 16th, 2024 Budget Committee meeting of Clackamas Fire District 1. This meeting is hybrid, Station 5, remote video conferencing is also available online. You're called to order per ORS 192-610 to 192-690, 610 to 690, ORS 192.65. For the meeting is being recorded. Roll call and introductions. Shelby, could you call the roll for us, please?
Wait, so 6 and 2? Six and 2.
Okay, section one.
Oh,
page
6 and
12,
1.
page-
Thank
Page
you.
12.
There you go. Yeah, page 12.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll start with board members. Jim,
Yes.
Chris,
Here.
Thomas,
Yes.
Marilyn. Here. Aaron. Charles,
Here.
William,
Here.
Julie. Here. Tim,
Here.
thank you.
Perfect. We just kind of went through introductions, I suppose, but, glad to have you guys back again. We haven't seen you since last year. Still, that was, two of you remember we appointed 2 new members last year? I stole the third one for Sunrise Water Authority's budget committee. Anytime anybody raises their hand to volunteer for. Grab them quick.
Are you coming to the meeting?
At this time, the normal function is we elect a member, to be the budget committee chairperson, because it's actually kind of different than the board. This is a separate deal. So at this time, I would accept nominations for a budget committee chairperson.
Okay, I'll nominate Charles Elliott, please.
I second that.
Second. Any other nominations? All those in favor of Charles being the budget committee chairperson, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Perfect. Any opposed? Charles, the meeting is yours.
Oh my, I almost opposed that. I didn't think it, for the record, it would go over that well. Do I have an, is there an annotated version of it?
There is not.
Okay, all right, that's it.
But.
So we're on to item 4 already.
Perfect.
No, we need a, we need a.
Secretary.
Oh, it's not on the agenda?
Yeah, so you call for nominations.
Let's call for nominations for secretary.
I nominate Judy.
Second.
Okay. Are there any other nominations? Okay. Hearing none. Congratulations. Yeah.
Julie, sorry to interrupt, just to be clear, the role of the secretary is to sign and confirm the minutes that we'll take after the meeting and share with you, and then, so you don't actually have to be taking active minutes during the meeting. So, thank you.
So we're under the budget message and overview. And turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I'll be providing the budget message and overview along with our finance manager, Michael Wong. Appreciate everybody being here. As you have noticed, unfortunately, Chief Brown could not be here tonight. I think, you know, that's a great sign of trust in me that after 2.5 years here, he feels comfortable with me running the budget meetings. I don't know if he would be here if he could. Yeah, we've got Assistant Pete Peters and instead. So we'll quickly provide an overview of the budget, go through kind of some of the key highlights and messages as we have in the past. There is room at the end, for general discussion, but also feel free to interrupt and ask questions as I go through the short presentation here. If topics come up that you have questions on or it spurs any questions, no need to be formal and wait till I'm done speaking. Looks like we've had Jay and Aaron both join us online, so that's good as well. Shelby, can you go to the presentation when you get a chance? On to the next slide. So just a reminder of why we're all here. I know you guys are veterans of this and all know, but obviously the role of the budget committee is to provide input and ask questions and propose any changes to the proposed budget. At the end, there are says pre-voting items will actually be 4 because we now have 2 ad valorem tax rates, right? So you'll have a vote on the permanent tax rate as well as the levy tax rate, approving the proposed budget and approving the bond levy amount to pay the debt service on our bonds. Okay, next slide. Before we talk about the proposed budget for this year, I did want to provide a recap of where we are so far this year. Obviously, everybody here was on the budget committee last year, and so was aware of the levy funding that the voters approved last May. So the current fiscal year was the first year of implementation of that levy. So we were able to add 5 additional positions, daily positions, starting January 1st to add a 4th firefighter to 5 companies. We have run 2 academies funded by levy staffing, and that'll also allow us to reopen for the first time in many years Station 13 on July 1st. So that'll be the next fund of levy staffing. So that academy is finishing up at the end of June. And then the other big piece of the levy funding was the one-time resources that it provides as we hire new staff. Those one-time resources that we're able to set aside for capital. So we were able to do a $7.9 million transfer to the capital replacement fund that's provided some resources there.
Excuse me.
Yes, go ahead.
So the friction that's involved by not having those employees actually hired yet. That's the money that we're using for capital.
Yes.
And you just told us a number, 7 million something. What's the percentage of that? It was almost half, yeah.
It's roughly half of the levy amount. And then so this year you'll see in the budget as we hire more employees through additional academies, that decreases to just over 4 million.
Mm-hmm.
And then in year 3, we'll essentially finish the levy staffing and nearly all of the levy funding will at that point be going to personnel. And the one-time money that we've had for capital from the levy will essentially be.
I understand that process. What
Yeah.
I'm not real clear on is the prioritization of the capital projects. I mean, I know that we have several capital projects on board, and I'm just wondering, with this influx of money,
Mhm.
how are we determining, and it'll be decreasing over the years,
Correct.
that capital?
Yes.
So how were those decided?
Well, one is decided in the budget, right? So we'll get to the capital plan and the capital projects that are proposed for funding. But what we do as part of the budget process is we allow department managers to put together requests as part of the budget capital and to us, and we sit down with the fire chief and the management team to go through them and decide what are the priorities and what we should fund. It also fits within our capital plan. So for example, fleet, we have useful lives for each of our
Oh, yeah,
apparatus,
sure.
right? And know
Yeah,
when
that's
those
very
are
clever.
replaced based
Very clever.
on wear and tear and mileage and age. And then we are working, and there's a proposal in the budget for a new facilities plan so that we can start to better manage and prioritize our facilities projects. So you'll see a lot of funds.
So that was 200 grand, as I recall.
Yes,
And is that a consultant's fee to help us develop that plan?
Yeah, the plan is to put together a request for proposals and go out and bring in a outside consultant to help us develop that plan and.
So, and this is not an unrealistic expectation, we're gonna have a consultant help us choose a consultant.
No, sorry, I
I've
guess I
seen it
didn't.
done before, but.
No, I guess I didn't follow. No, our plan is to hire a consultant to do the facilities plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
The 200,000 is,
To pay the consultant to do the research, come do site visits and create the plan.
okay,
By working with our facilities manager and the management team to develop a proposals on how we can.
and have you
Better take
selected
care.
that consultant yet?
We have not, we're asking for funding to do that so that we can go out and advertise for it and then select the consultant.
So I don't mean to cloud things too
Yep.
much, but of that 200,000, then some of that money is gonna be spent acquiring a consultant to develop the plan.
No, that will be existing staff time to put together the proposal and, I mean, maybe a few $100s to advertise it.
Oh, yeah.
But the 200,000 is meant entirely for the study.
Okay,
Staff will develop the proposals.
thank you.
Okay, just finishing up, the 2023-24 recap. Revenues have been strong. Part of that is assessed value came in, much higher than we had, forecasted in the budget for 23-24. We had assumed an AV growth of 3.25%. It actually came in at just above 4.5%. And as I noted there, a lot of that increase is kind of a one-time increase, at least for now, because it was the result of the Oregon City Urban Renewal Area foregoing their property tax increment in 2023-24. Under current plans, they would take a percentage of that back in 24-25, and then beyond that, it's from my unclear what the long-term plans are for that. But if they were to take back all of that increment in say 25-26, that's why we kind of have to treat that increase as one-time revenue and not.
Well, even that
ongoing.
25% is not a guarantee, yeah? I mean, the commissioner that was pushing for that initial $2 million deferment won't be here at the end of the year. And I don't know how much support there's going to be for continuing the deferment of urban renewal.
Yeah, the letter we and information received from the finance director of Oregon City was that they had adopted a 2-year budget. In the first year, which is 23-24, they were deferring 100%. And then in the budget year, in 24-25, they're only deferring 75%. So that's what we base the assumption on.
But you and I know they
they
can
have
do an
provided
adjusted
change.
budget whenever they want to.
But they've adopted a biennial budget, and as far as I know, from what the information I have, they haven't come back and changed it, so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is it, I assume the collection rates are about proportionately with on the. Okay.
Other newsworthy item, we did successfully complete the apprentice program, so we received a $2 million grant from the state to run an apprentice program. And we were able to hire the apprentices, bring them through an academy, put them in positions throughout the fire district. And then all of those apprentices applied for permanent positions with the fire district in our last round of recruitment, and all of them have been offered permanent positions with the fire district. So they will become regular employees and also help with our levy staffing and filling currently vacant positions within the next month.
That's great news.
So that's been a good initiative, allowed us to bring in a good pool of candidates that we otherwise wouldn't have received.
That's great news. I wanted to get just a little more clarification on the collection rate that Charles brought up. Do you have any idea why that was better this year, and are other districts finding that as well, do you know?
I don't know about the collection rate, this year, right? So we haven't finished.
Yeah.
We haven't finished collections. They're coming in strong, but a lot of that is because our assessed value is higher. We did see an increase in collection rates in 22-23. And we're talking, you know, a small
yeah.
percentage. But it's not always entirely clear, what those differences equate to. So I don't have a good explanation for why it varies from year to year.
Maybe a better economic climate.
It could be.
Yeah.
And you know, last year we had one very large delinquent payer. And that can sway the results by a percentage. They paid, you know, a month late, but at the time it didn't show up in our collection rate, so.
Okay, thank you.
But there's always concern depending on the economic climate about, how many folks will defer payment. So just in summary, all of that added together, right, the strong revenues, we have implemented some cost saving measures, to, the largest one being contracting out for our information technology services. But we've also had some vacant positions that we're still working to fill, so that has resulted in savings. Obviously, we've had price increases, the most notable being our workers' comp insurance has gone up in costs, and that's happening again, you'll see it in the proposed budget. Property insurance, utilities have gone up, and then we've had some unanticipated costs, related to the Camp Creek fire and the Bull Run watershed, some levy implementation costs that weren't budgeted for, which is largely just an unknown in terms of how much it would cost to outfit the new employees and upgrade some of the station facilities. And then we've had some unanticipated facility failures, elevators, HVAC systems that went out, so we have gone over budget in facilities. But the net result of all of this is we do expect a surplus at the end of this year. And so that's a good sign, and it will allow us to either have some flexibility in our new fund balance or put some additional funds into our capital replacement reserve for the future. And that will be something we'll bring to the board of directors in June as part of the supplemental budget.
So the governor's office issued a press release just this morning regarding a little confab that they had with the Department of Forestry, and I don't know if you guys get those press releases, but they were making some projections about forest fires this summer, a couple of months that were going to be lower than historically, and a couple of months are going to be much more significant. And I don't know how you budget for that.
So when we are planning the proposed budget, there's a couple different pieces. We don't budget for conflagration deployments, right? So when Office of the State Fire Marshal sends out requests for assistance for large wildfires, we will send crews to those. But because those are one time in nature, and because they're not a guaranteed source of expense or income, we don't budget for those because we don't want to include revenues that may not materialize.
Kind of like a grant.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Right. And so that's another thing we always do in the supplemental. There have been years where, you know, it increases our expenses by, you know, 600 to 700,000, but all of that is paid with revenue from the state. And then there are other years where there aren't a lot of fires, and then we don't have to make a budget change. The other piece of that, of course, is our wildland hand crew, which is a seasonal crew. They're funded both through deployments and through contracts to go out and do prescribed burns and other, you know, clearing of vegetation and things like that. So they have an independent revenue source, and they're budgeted in a separate fund. So we do try to take that into account, but we don't include it in the proposed budget. So you'll see lines in the budget for conflagration, personnel costs and conflagration revenue, but there's nothing in the proposed budget here for that because it's not a guarantee.
Speaking of lines in the budget, there was one that I thought was just, and it's a nit. It's an absolute nit, and I apologize for bringing it up, but I was just curious about account number 5555. And that's something about school. And it was a couple of years ago budgeted, just a couple $1,000, and then it was used by the urban people. And then it's still a line item, even though there's nothing there.
Can we? So can we go by order, kind of
Yeah.
go with this and then get back into that?
Thanks.
You got it. Okay, so just a quick overview of the proposed budget. I always like to have some themes for the budget. And a lot of these are the same as last year, right? So we are trying to create a budget that is responsible and sustainable. Obviously, the main theme of this budget is continuing to implement the levy. So we do continue to hire and have planned 2 academies for the next fiscal year. The current levy plan is that we would operate a quick response vehicle, staffed with two people, beginning in January when the next academy graduates, and then the goal is to open Station 12, when the following academy graduates, early next summer. So that's kind of the implementation plan for moving forward on the levy. We continue to grapple with inflation and rising costs. I talked about some of those already related to workers' comp, property and liability insurance, utilities. And then we also have our personnel costs. And so another theme of this budget is some uncertainty at the moment of exactly what our personnel costs will be next fiscal year. Both of our collective bargaining agreements expire on June 30th. And so we are currently in successor bargaining negotiations on the wage and compensation package for next fiscal year and the following years. So as you probably saw in the budget message, we've assumed a 4% cost of living increase in the proposed budget, consistent with where we are in negotiations right now. But all of that is, and any other compensation things are subject to change depending on where those negotiations go.
Was it COLA last in the previous budget?
The COLA last year was 3%.
What's our experience rating with state?
It's just under 1.
And so the increase in our workers' comp costs has not been because of the deteriorating experience ratio, right?
That's been part of it. Our experience rating a few years ago was just under 0.7, and it's gone up. We've had a few large claims in recent years, but it's also the result of some structural challenges that state is having, workers' comp in general is having with increasing claims and premiums. And then also our payroll has grown under the levy, so that's added some workers' comp costs. And then again, we continue to try to create a budget that matches our organizational priorities, right? So investing in our people, obviously the levy and hiring people in the levy is part of that. We're also adding some new admin and support positions so that side of the district grows along with the growth in operations and firefighters, so we can support the mission. And then of course, investing in our people by providing quality benefits and cost of living increases. Investing in our capital assets, we already touched on that, 7.9 million last year, proposal for 4.3 million to go to the capital replacement fund this year. And then to continue to try to establish a resilient budget, right? Relying on conservative forecasts that we can be confident in, and trying to be fiscally responsible in what we decide to fund so that we can continue to maintain a strong fund balance and a balanced budget going forward and not create deficits. So those are the goals with the budget. Just a quick slide here, just showing our beginning fund balance. It is much higher. It's expected to be much higher in 24-25. That's pretty much the levy for you right there, right? So the funds have come in, we put them in the capital replacement fund. And so that's most of the change that you see. That's a one-time thing as we spend the capital replacement dollars, absent other changes, right? That fund balance would over time decrease down to kind of our previous level of around the $21 million mark. But again, as we, assuming we don't create deficits and continue to create surpluses, we'll maintain a fund balance that allows us to operate through November without having to do tax anticipation notes.
Why is it called an optional levy? Like you have some citizens that ask, oh, it's optional, but you gotta pay it anyway. You know why it's called an optional levy?
I assume it's called an optional levy because the voters had an option to pass it or not.
Oh, okay,
Local option.
okay.
And they'll get another option in roughly 4 years, right? So Property tax and AV growth. So want to talk quickly on this one because obviously property tax is 85% of our revenue and the main driver of our fiscal, one of the main drivers of our fiscal health. As I mentioned earlier, the AV growth for 23-24 was very high. And again, a lot of that was the one-time result of Oregon City Urban Renewal. Absent that one-time change, AV growth in 23-24 would only have been about 3.6%. And so that's one of the reasons why in 24-25 we're only forecasting a 3.5% growth rate is you really have 3 consecutive years of AV growth being less than 4%. Once you take out the effect of Oregon City Urban Renewal in 23-24. There are some, we get a report or a letter every year from the county assessor's office about what they think our AV growth is gonna be. They're estimating it's gonna be between 3.5 and 4% in 24-25, so we took the lower end of that. If you look at the next slide, you can see one of the reasons, and this was also in the budget book on page 29, but you can see one of the reasons I'm concerned about AV growth both next year and for future years is one of the big drivers of AV growth is construction activity. How many new homes, new apartments, office buildings, all of those things are being built. And you can see in this table that 2023 was one of the lowest years for new housing permits in our district in a while. And so part of the question is how long is that trend going to continue in 2024? In next fiscal year, we still could be seeing the benefit of some of these earlier permit years as those projects actually get constructed and finished. And you may not see the effect of this lower permit year for another 1 to 2 or even 3 years. A lot of this is related to interest rates and how long interest rates remain high and whether new projects can pencil out and maybe construction activity will increase. But that's part of the justification for why we're proposing to base our budget on a lower AV growth rate. Okay, moving on, just a quick overview of the general fund revenue. We talked about kind of the tax revenue being at a 3.5% growth rate. The calculations for property tax, both our permanent rate and our levy rate are on pages 31 and 32 of the budget. Both assume that AV grows at 3.5%, and a collection rate of 95.75%. Some of the other big revenue increases relatively for their categories are our interest earnings. And we do expect interest rates to remain relatively high for fiscal year 24-25. So there will be some additional revenue from that compared to prior years. And once again, the forecast is conservative. It assumes that the interest rate starts out at 5% in July, but drops to 3% by next June. So if interest rates do stay higher, there would be some upside in the budget. Our contract revenue increases a little, and that's mainly because we have contracts for service with Gladstone and the city and Sandy Fire. And so as their assessed value grows, so does their required payment to us to manage those contracts for service. And then we have a pretty substantial growth in other revenue. And a lot of that is related to reimbursements we receive for workers' comp insurance and reimbursements we receive from our health plan. And that's kind of a correction from an under budgeting in the past for those revenues. But essentially those are it's our stop loss insurance payments, right? So if our health claim costs get too high, then our insurer reimburses us for some of those. So it's not necessarily new revenue, it's a reimbursement, right? So our claims are high, so we're gonna get this reimbursement. And then we have some transfers from our other funds as we close out the apprentice program. And then a transfer from the wildland mitigation fund where Crew 30 pays for basically their overhead costs by transferring some money back to the general fund. So in total, that's how we get to our revenue numbers.
Does the contract between the county and AMR have any impact on the subcontract
So the contract between AMR and the county does have an impact on our EMS revenues, right? So we have an agreement with AMR that allows us to do some ambulance transport. So to the extent that contract stays in place and we continue to do ambulance transport, we're receiving ambulance billing revenue that goes into that EMS revenues line.
So if they didn't continue it, then that might, you would.
We would have to potentially, negotiate or figure out the arrangement with the new ambulance provider or the county about how that will work.
Or speaking of the EMS, are we currently having the same problems that you're hearing about in Portland? I mean, I've heard some inkling that where the ambulances aren't able to make it to some of the incidents. And you would think that would increase our EMS dollars rather than decrease, which I see we have a decrease of, $100,000. It seems to me we should be going up instead of down on that, but maybe we're not having the same problem.
We have had some shortages on ambulances, not as extreme, I think, as Multnomah County has experienced. But there have been some instances of that. The decrease there is not so much related to our ambulance billing revenue. It's related to a state and federal program that reimburses EMS providers for transporting Medicaid patients. And there's some uncertainty about what those reimbursement rates will be for the next fiscal and calendar year. So I made an adjustment there just to be conservative. So that's where that reduction comes from, is the anticipation of that program not funding as high as it has in the past.
Okay.
Okay. You're on.
Yeah, here's a summary of our expenses for a 3-year look, and some of the main increases you'll see are for salaries and wages and benefits. And that's due primarily from the levy staffing, and then also increases in admin and support to support the increased levy staffing, as well as a 4% COLA that we have estimated right now. And as Mark mentioned, we're in the middle of bargaining, so that one is still a little bit of an unknown, but that's what we have the number at right now. And then down, we'll talk a little bit about materials and services later, but for transfers out, we have a $4.3 million transfer in the proposed budget. And the transfers in fiscal year 24 and 25 combined are consistent with what we had planned for the capital in the levy. Next slide, please. Okay, and then highlighting further on this slide, some of the main increases in fiscal year 25. First of all, overtime. We have mainly, we've under budgeted overtime in the past. So in fiscal year 25 proposed budget, we're trying to increase this. And there's different areas that we're doing this in. There's unforeseen callbacks that we're trying to bump up. Firefighter physicals, recruitments and promotions. And then as well as events such as the Camp Creek fire that we had racked up quite a bit of overtime on. And then also as part of the strategic plan, we want to also provide more opportunities for training to departments. So there's some increased overtime costs associated with those trainings as well. And then looking at the workers' comp line, as Mark had mentioned a little bit earlier, workers' comp has gone up quite a bit. In the last 2 years, it's almost tripled. And there's multiple factors. It's just the premiums are increasing across all industries right now. And we've also had a few years of large claims, which have an impact on our rate. And then also one of the things that has changed is the conditions that are covered by workers' comp, such as PTSD is a newer one that is attributing to our workers' comp costs right now. And this is affecting, first responder agencies across the state as well.
So the hope of fewer major accidents is kind of being offset by the increase in other types of work-related. I'm not quite sure how they're, I guess PTSD, if the trigger for that was work-related. It
Yeah.
gets covered. I mean,
Yeah.
if somebody gets hired and we don't know they have PTSD before they get hired,
Yes.
it seems like we would have some defense against that.
Yes, and I mean, you know, those determinations are outside of our scope, right? That goes to the workers' comp, the safe to determine whether they're gonna, approve that claim or not. But that's the basic idea, right? If it's related to work, then it would be, potentially approved and add to our bill history.
Well, we can appeal some of those.
Okay,
Before we move on
Yeah, go ahead.
from this one, so, I mean, you have more positions, right? Do you think that overtime number is sufficient enough? I mean, you have more shifts that need to be filled than you have with the increased
Yes.
staffing.
right,
You don't have every position filled
Mhm.
currently.
right.
You know, D shift is not enough. So
Yeah.
do you think that's truly adequate?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that actually does fit with the next slide, right? So when we have to fill a shift because either that position is vacant or because somebody calls in sick or takes vacation, right? We call that operational replacement overtime, right? And as the board knows, and probably some of the budget committee knows, that's been a rising cost, and it's been a cost that we've under budgeted for, as you can see in this graph, for many years. And so part of our plan in building a resilient budget was to budget adequately for that in 23-24. And we're pretty close, right? So we budgeted at 77.4 million. My current estimate is gonna come in at 7.5, which is a big increase. And Julie, you hit on all the reasons, right? So we've added staffing under the levy. And we don't have all those positions filled, and so it's resulting in some overtime, right? And so the strategy for 2024-25 is that we're going to fill more positions than we add so that we will have less backfill required, right? And that's part of the strategy of bringing on the apprentices in June, is that will immediately put 13 additional folks on into positions, right? So they'll fill some of those vacant spots under D shift, and be able to allow us to have less overtime, right? The other thing we did this year was when we added, we wanted to add the 5 positions in January, because the voters had approved the levy and we wanted to move forward on that as soon as possible. But we added those before we were able to hire all the people we needed to do that. And so that's why we've had high overtime this year. So, you know, we had an academy of 12 in the fall, but you need at least 15 people to staff those 5 positions, but we went ahead and did it anyway, knowing that it would result in extra overtime. But as we added the additional levy positions, we're no longer gonna do that, right? So we're gonna have an academy of 16 in the fall, 18 in the fall, but what we're gonna use that to just open the 2-person QRV, right? So again, we'll have additional staffing that will reduce our overtime. So as long as we maintain our staffing, our operational replacement should fall. And that's why you see it decreasing in the budget to just over 7 million this year. The trade-off for that is we are hiring more people, right? So our personnel expenses in terms of salary and benefits go up at the same time. But that's the trade-off that we're willing to make. That's a strategy we're gonna implement, and hopefully if we maintain our positions, we'll come in under that 7.1 million in 24-25.
But we have enough drivers.
The apparatus operator issue, we just completed a testing process, an internal testing process for apparatus operators. And the intent is if we don't get enough apparatus operators in the internal process, our spring academy, we will do a lateral process to recruit apparatus operators from other agencies. But yeah, sounds like you're aware of that situation, so yeah, and if we run short on apparatus operators, that will put pressure on overtime, because we'll need to pick up extra shifts that say firefighters or whatever, others can't, so that's on our radar as well. Okay, health expenses, I won't spend a lot of time on that. You know, it's forecasted to go up by just under 13%. A share of that is inflation, right? We anticipate health expenses to go up between 5% and 6% each year. And then, of course, we'll have more employees, and so that will also grow up will raise our health expenses. Unfortunately, we're flying kind of blind on that one right now. Because our health claims, what's the word, health claims processor was the victim of a hacking situation, and had to process claims for a couple months. They're supposed to get back up to speed this week. But what that means is we don't really have up-to-date expenses for this fiscal year to know where we're trending. Prior to them going down, we were slightly high from where we wanted to be, but not terribly so.
What's the window on that? How much time do we not have information?
About 2 months. So, and hopefully those claims will come in here in the next couple of weeks, and we'll get a better picture. Materials and services, once again, that looks like a fairly large increase, and as was written in the budget message, a fairly large share of that is a change in how we're providing our IT services. So we have replaced our internal IT services team with an outside vendor. And so what that did is it increased our material and services costs because we're now paying a vendor to do it, but decreased our personnel services costs. So most of what you're seeing here, and then you have the $200,000 one-time facility study, which we talked about. We have some minor increases to the facilities and logistics budget to help implement the levy, and also because those have been historically under budgeted, and then we have inflation. But outside of that change kind of in facility, in IT, and the one-time money for the facility study, it's not like we're buying a lot of new things or services. It's more kind of that change in IT services and inflation that's driving that increase there.
Can I ask about the IT provider now, the new provider? Imagine they're domestic.
Yeah, it's, we did a process and, are working with a company called Fastech. They're based in Vancouver, and they have, 1 to 2 people on site with us.
Vancouver,
Each day.
Washington or
Yeah.
Canada? Okay.
Vancouver, Washington, yes.
And do we just, the IT people that we had before, have they just been,
They were laid off,
they were laid off?
yes.
Okay.
Those positions were eliminated.
So what kind of savings are we expecting because it's not in-house anymore?
The savings are around, 400,000 to 450,000 a year.
With the same level of service?
We're planning, we are expecting improved service,
Improved service?
yes. And that process is ongoing as they get up to speed, but the idea is that with their expertise and ability and knowledge from serving a bunch of different other agencies and private companies and things like that, they're able to hire and maintain staff with expertise that we weren't able to maintain in-house with our small IT team that we could afford.
Or
Yeah.
if I may, William, we have had feedback from the stations as well as my own personal experience. The IT work has substantially improved. They are able to respond faster because these people are trained and we didn't have the capability to set up for the updated trainings. But I feel the service has improved. Because
That's great news. That's great news. This is a small aside. So I talked to a lot of citizens, and when I mentioned that I was on the fire district, but one of the groups that I was polling was some actual firefighters and management. And I said, if you had a magic wand, where would you spend money? And the answers were pretty disparate, but one was on training. We just need to spend more money on training. I mean, what's the sense of having staff that doesn't know what they're doing, but I think we do. And the other one was on, which surprised me, was on telecommunications and communications equipment. Which, is the IT provider gonna be involved in that at all? Telecommunications equipment is what I'm talking about specifically.
Yeah, well, I mean, so we just changed our cell phone provider, through their recommendation. But you'll see in the capital plan, we're still looking, I mean, we're still in the process for looking for new radios, and so, no, but they are involved in that.
Okay.
Yeah. And offering suggestions and efficiencies where they can.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, man. Oh, okay, so moving on from the general fund, then, talking about the capital replacement plan, and this is just a summary. But page 139 has a list of all the capital, projects that we are proposing. As is written in the narrative in there, you know, a lot of these, will be multi-year projects. The intent is to appropriate the money this year so that facilities and fleet can plan. But I don't think, nor would I expect, that we could spend this amount of funding in a single year. And in fleet particular, you know, 2.5 of that is money that we've actually was appropriated this year, and we have ordered the apparatus. But they haven't been delivered yet, and in the case of the engine, won't be delivered still for a couple of years. That's the timeline on building new fire engines. So, so we do propose once again to replace and purchase one new engine. We're also looking at refurbishing 2 existing engines to provide them an extended life, but not pay the full cost of buying a new one. So that's a process that we're undergoing, to try to save some money, but extend the life of the existing vehicles. The largest investment, compared to prior years is in facilities. We have a lot of deferred maintenance in facilities. We were lucky enough to hire a new facilities and project manager in the spring, who came over after many years of experience in Oregon City. And she's been great in terms of helping us identify our deferred maintenance and work through some plans for how we can prioritize projects around the district.
Who's that?
Denise Toyoka. And so she is the genesis behind wanting to pursue a facilities plan. And we've been working with her to try and refine the scope and find cost savings where we can in everything we're doing. But we do have some upgrades, station upgrades that need to occur, most notably making sure that Station 12 is ready to open as part of the levy staffing next summer. But also some other safety issues and things that need to be cleaned up. And then, of course, just your regular building and system maintenance, right? Making sure that we're replacing HVACs, flooring, all the things that need to be replaced on a regular schedule, so our facilities stay up to par. I think that's kind of the main highlights from the capital proposals. You know, I would say that some of the proposals we're still waiting to refine the scope. Obviously, we'll need to go out and get bids and bring them to the board before we move forward on a lot of these projects. And so we want to be very deliberate about what we're funding and making sure that the things we're funding are the highest priority and are things, our facilities that we're going to keep and use for the long term. We don't want to put money into something that is not part of the long-term plan for the district. So,
Can I ask you, on page 139, in the second section there, it says 130th Avenue improvements, 1.1 million, that's urban renewal. Is that the urban renewal from the Clackamas?
yeah, so the county, we had we had urban renewal funds from Clackamas Town Center that could only be spent primarily at Station One. And we didn't foresee the need for that level of investment in Station One, so we asked the county if we could move them to a different urban renewal area. So they passed a resolution that allowed that money to transfer over to the industrial area of urban renewal. So we can spend it on our logistics fleet, training, and Station 8 campus down there. So we're gonna try to prioritize those dollars for improvements there. Probably the biggest priorities are adding some restrooms and for our recruit academy, and then also looking at improvements to fleet or Station 8.
Does that deplete, the 1.1 deplete the urban renewal?
That would be that's the remaining amount left.
Okay, thanks.
On the facilities plan,
Mhm.
is it something that's gonna be similar to like a reserve study that condos do, that they're gonna be mapping out, like, okay, here's how many roofs you're gonna have to replace in this period of time and all those kinds of things, so have your years mapped out for your big projects?
Yeah, that's part of the plan is to, what needs to be replaced, what's the schedule for it, how much is it gonna cost? And then also, what are some options for how you're going to fund it and pay for those things. I think that we're getting close to the end here of my comments, but every year, right, we do include in section 10, the 5-year capital plan. And trying to forecast what the cost will be of certain capital replacements. Comes with a lot of caveats, right, that everything could change depending on how things go. We feel pretty confident in understanding the size and age of our fleet. Much less certainty around what our facilities costs will be. That's part of the facilities plan study. So those numbers are still being worked on. And we're working with our IT vendor on kind of what's our long-term plan for when and how we replace computers and other IT equipment, so we can improve that number. Probably the biggest out year item in there is in communications. We're in 25-26, we do have 1.6 million budgeted. And that's because our handheld radios are in need of replacement, and that's a project we're planning to research this year. And then hopefully have a plan in place to propose in next year's budget about how we'll fund and replace radios. The plan, as you can see there at the bottom, based on our current fund balance and the contributions we're able to make, is not funded after fiscal year 26-27. And so that is an ongoing concern. That's based on kind of our current forecast, which again shows low growth rates in the next couple fiscal years in terms of revenue. Also based on but the forecast, like I said earlier, the forecast is very murky because we don't know what our personnel costs are necessarily going to be this fiscal year or for the next 3 to 4 fiscal years, depending on the bargaining agreement. So that's why you have the deficit there. And obviously, as I said earlier, the goal is that although we're appropriating 4.5 million, say, to facilities or 4.8 million for apparatus, not all of that money is going to be spent in 24-25, and so some of that will carry forward into those future years. We'll still have projects that we're working on. But the long-term goal of the district is to build a sustainable budget where we are regularly setting aside from our general fund, not from levy one-time funds, but from our general fund, a regular ongoing amount to capital replacement. And right now, because things are so uncertain, we're going with the status quo. But if future forecasts are showing that we're not able to set that money aside, we're gonna have to make some operational changes to make that happen. But for now, we have a cushion because of the levy, but it's a long-term thing we need to focus on.
Speaking on the issue of uncertainty, the reserves and contingency funds. Have those been formally set now? I mean, it seems like a few years ago, it was, we just put a little bit in there and there wasn't any methodology. And now I think we have a system, do we? Or how much do we calculate for reserves?
So for contingency, we have a percentage, right? So we always have a contingency line in the budget, to make sure that we have funds set aside for any unexpected expenses.
And that's state mandated, yeah.
It's not state mandated, it's allowed by local budget law that you can have a contingency, and there's a maximum that you can put into contingency. But it's not,
Okay.
you're not necessarily mandated to have one, right?
Okay,
And then for our reserve funds, again, we only really have, one right now, and that's the capital replacement fund. And so, you know, and that's where we have the one-time money coming in from the levy, and our goal is to provide ongoing funds in there of at least probably 2 million. As soon as we find the capacity to do that.
I think that we would have something similar to that for our computer equipment and for our communication devices, because we know that the technology changes so fast that we're gonna be replacing whatever we buy. I mean,
Yeah.
if we can buy it, it's already obsolete.
Yeah, and all of that's built into our capital replacement plan. We do have a line for technology. And so we're trying, and communications.
Okay.
And so we are definitely forecasting those, right? What's our average, with our IT vendor, what's the average life of our PCs, our laptops? And how do we fund that replacement, and relying on their expertise to give us, recommendations on when and how we should replace those things.
Are we doing any of this forecasting with IT, with AI? Are we using AI at all?
No,
Nothing?
not in my office, no.
Nope. Okay.
So,
We will.
we may. Okay, a couple more slides, I believe, Michael.
Yeah, so this slide is, to remind folks that we still have a debt service, due on the bond, and it requires roughly 8 cents per 1,000 of the assessed value to pay off. And then this bond debt will retire in 31/32. And then we have, our other funds, grants funds, want to mention the apprentice program funds. We're going to be transferring 250,000 from there to the general fund, and this is for overhead costs of the apprentice program. And then the large grant that we have in fiscal 25 is the community paramedic pilot program. And that's $1 million in ARPA funding that we were awarded through Clackamas County. And we estimate that we'll spend about $620,000 in the first year of the grant, which will pay for salaries and benefits for one community paramedic, 2 community EMTs, and then 1 part-time case manager. And then in addition to those salaries and benefits, equipment, software, training, EMS supplies, and PPE.
Who's that grant from?
That's ARPA funding, but it's awarded, it's kind of passed through, the county is who we're working through on that one. And it's a program that's going to be similar to like the Portland Fire and Rescue chat program, to respond to like frequent 911 users, at-risk populations. It's and also try to help reduce the responses from the larger companies.
So is this a kind of an offshoot from the previous position, and I forget the person's name that was staffing it?
Amy Jo?
Yeah,
Yeah,
is it
so
kind of like building out?
it's building on that program. So we still have the community paramedic Amy Jo retired, but we refilled that position. So that program is still running and it's funded from our general fund. And then this will be augmenting that and working directly with that person with grant funds to further build out that program. Provide support.
So are they limited duration
Yeah,
positions?
these will be limited duration grant fund positions.
Is there I don't know how to, an internship or some way, I mean, like, is it, or you just have to be a paramedic and you're expected to be able to have on the ground right away?
Yeah, so we are just starting the recruitment on those positions, because we just were awarded the grant, but yeah, it'll be a direct hire of a paramedic and some EMTs.
Is that gonna affect some of the communication requirements you have with them? I mean, like, so I can't, I mean, how you dispatch or deploy?
They won't be necessarily response, but they'll be support, so,
Okay.
they won't be on a 24-hour schedule or anything like that.
It sounds great.
I have a question, I don't know which one you mentioned. So it's $1 million for 2 years, and we're gonna spend 60% of it in the first year. What are we gonna cover with the second year?
Well, some of the, yes, some of it will be like, upfront, it costs a little higher for the equipment and I believe it's, also a vehicle that they're adding to the fleet to make it, so we have 2 vehicles for that program. Yeah, that's.
Yeah,
Do you need-
sounds good. No, I think-
Yeah,
Yeah, and then the last one, we already talked kind of about Crew 30 and they are in a separate fund. And remain fully self-supporting through contact with the state and US Forest Service, ODF and the US Forest Service. So that's been a very, very successful program. We've got at least 20 of them hired on for the season right now. And so they'll be hired both through this summer and then presumably next summer, assuming everything goes well.
Question on the debt service, you had mentioned, the prepayments, right, in the narrative, and that we chose to keep that in the bank
Mhm.
for the interest part of it. So how does that work if you haven't made your prepayment in the year? Can you go back and make up previous years, or does that money just sit in the bank to be available for the balloon at the end?
Yeah, so we have set those funds aside, so they are sitting in the bank. I think, and we have the money appropriated to make the prepayment, and it may make sense to start that prepayment process, even though interest rates are high, simply to pay down that debt and make sure that we don't have that balloon payment in 32, 33. We only have the option to make the prepayment once a year on June 15th. And so we have a decision to make here in the next few days really about whether we want to make that prepayment this year. And I think it might make sense, so that we can pay that down. Or once again, with interest rates high, we could leave it there and it could accumulate interest, but we're talking about only, and I shouldn't say only because it is a lot of money, but that $450,000, the interest that's earned on it is not a game changer. It might be better to reduce that principal and start those prepayments, so we know we're not gonna find ourselves in an issue 8 years from now.
So on the mitigation fund, is it, that they actually do assistance of residents, is it too, if I'm not mistaken, or areas? Is there any positive benefit of having this kind of program in place on people's insurance rate, homeowners insurance or risk? Can they say like, well, we have got this program going and it's gonna, we're doing assessments and that.
I don't believe so as a whole. It's not going to affect our ISO rating, which is what insurers use. Certainly if individual property owners were able to provide more defensible space, maybe they could, but
Not that directly.
Insurance company's gonna be pretty reluctant. Year before last, they paid out 108% of all the money they took into the state of Oregon.
Yeah.
Kind of like that in a whole bunch of other places.
Yeah, and that's why I was wondering if there's some, at least some way to pick it in. Let's see if there's people on the calling in that might have questions that haven't had a chance to weigh in.
Okay. Jim and Jay and Aaron.
Well, they're all muted anyway, so that's fine.
They look good.
It looks like they're all good.
Okay.
All right.
So that pretty much ends, you know, our prepared presentation to kind of go through the budget highlights. Obviously, we have our recommendations at the end, which is asking the budget committee to approve our tax rates, our debt repayment and the proposed budget. Prior probably to getting to that, we'll just, you know, want to see if there's our other questions or general discussion that folks want to ask of me or Michael.
I do have some questions. I appreciate their summary of positions that you put in there, but I found that perhaps, it was kind of inconsistent as you go through the different departments here. Some of them had how many FTEs there were, others did not.
Yeah.
I think it would be, having to go back and forth was kind of a pain. It's a minor thing, but it was pretty helpful. And it'd just be nice to have it consistent.
Yeah.
And then I had a question, I noticed board of directors, you guys are clearly making too much money. You need to step down a little bit there. I noticed that the Sandy, the board of directors is, double, and can I assume that that's because you're spending 10 grand for their budget?
Yeah, so the Sandy Board of Directors has a professional services line in there. And that's because we are required to do an audit for Sandy Fire. And we're required to still pay some liability insurance for Sandy Fire. And so absent a better place to put it in our budget, we put it in the Board of Directors line item.
Okay, and then under health and wellness, I noticed it says medical exam costs are increasing by 16%. Is this an in-house system that we use? And if so, why is it going up 16%? I mean,
Only a portion of that is done in-house that's sent to Adventist.
Yeah, and that's the portion that's going up, again, Adventist has raised their rates.
Yeah, most of the pre-work is done in-house, but the actual physical and doctor visit are through Adventist.
you know, that's a big, it's a big increase. Okay. No, I have other questions, but go ahead, if anybody else does.
William had a question about item 555. What
Well,
was
it's just a curiosity thing, actually. I won't take the time to pursue that. However, I did notice on bottom of page 43, this is perhaps for future presentations. You've got a bar chart of 5, but I noticed that it doesn't start at 0. It just jumps in 3.5, 3.5, 3.75, but that 0.75 almost looks like it's double from,
Yeah.
because you're not looking at 0. So I just suggest if you show this again, it might be nice to have some context with it.
I agree, I hate it when bar charts don't start at 0. I don't know how we missed that.
That's why we're here.
But and I appreciate the feedback, it is a long document, and Michael and I have both proved that many times that we have come across them.
I was very
So,
impressed.
So,
I was very impressed. Spelling, grammar, everything is just spot on. Even the numbers look good.
I did have a question also on training, department. It shows that there's 6 FTEs for this year. We had 10, we've lost 4.
yeah,
And we went up $90,000. I mean, $9,000, not a huge jump.
yeah.
It seems if you've lost 4, you know, you wouldn't see that kind of an increase. I'm just curious as to.
Yeah, and that speaks to your earlier point where, our table in that instance, right, doesn't necessarily reflect the budget, but what we've done in training is for our academy training, we've gone to a model where for each academy, we bring, employees off of the line and bring them in to be the trainers for the academy. And then after the 4 months when the academy is over, they go back to work in the fire station, right? So my intent was, well, for 4 months out of the year, they should be in the training budget, and for 8 months out of the year, they should be in the main operations budget. But where do you put them on the FTE chart, right?
Right.
So they ended up in the training budget, right? Most of the cost of those positions ended up in the training budget, but then on the FTE chart, they show as still in operations rather than in training. So training costs haven't necessarily changed that much because we're still for eight months of the year, we have the academy trainers there. But it does create a little confusion in our FTE table.
Yeah, that's, thank you, that explains it, that did confuse me, and I'm easily confused.
We were too late to say anything.
I didn't want to say much, and nor did you, and nor should you. I noticed in training also, software and supplies, I mean, you've been basically, you up to $52,000, huge increase.
Yeah,
Is that software primarily, or?
that's software, and I thought we maybe had a note, yeah, so, and that's part of our IT transition, right? So we had all of our software costs consolidated into our IT department. And then when we moved to the vendor, some of those software costs were moved back to the departments that actually use that software. So in this case, training uses a software called Target Solutions that sends out all of our training videos. That is where we track certifications and training. So last year that was in IT's budget. We moved it back into training's budget. So
So the same for the 70,000 in professional services is basically the trainers. You got, I mean, they went from 22,500 to $70,000 on professional services. Line 7110, page 68.
So we have 70,000 marked, for fireground training and truck company training.
Yeah.
That they'll be doing, in fiscal 25.
So yeah, so that's actually an increase in services or whatever you want to call it, but operations wanted some additional funds for training, and so that's what that is.
But it's called professional services. That's
Right, because we're bringing in an outside
different team.
trainer to provide the
Okay.
training.
So basically it's training.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So is that, moving the money around the big difference between like the software and supplies that was in IT this year versus next year, the 600 versus the 283?
Yeah, part of that is some of the funds have moved into departments, but then the increase is due to now we're paying Fast Tech, our IT vendor, professional services fees rather than paying personnel.
And I'm sorry to take the floor again, but I'm just confused and I've seen the chief answer this last year, but you've got water, rope rescue, hazardous material, all those different divisions, and you've got dollars assigned to it, proposals. But you don't have FTEs because obviously, or should there be FTEs assigned to it? Because it's like this, you should have a certain amount of employees that are water specialists, correct? So you could say, I've got 10 guys and I'm paying them over the $108,000, that we can figure out what that percentage is.
Right.
I just don't see that under hazardous materials, and that's where I was confused, because we've got 300 people, but we don't know how they're all broken out through this, and it was just confusing to me.
Right, and so our tech teams, right, hazard materials, water, rope rescue, and USAR, right, they are dual functions, right? So they're also regular, they're firefighters, lieutenants, captains that are working at the station, responding to fires, responding to medical calls, but they're also trained as technical teams, right? So their regular salary and benefits, we budget in general operations, along with the remaining of the other firefighters and captains and lieutenants, right? But then those programs also have separate costs that need to be maintained, right? Training, equipment and things, and so we budget those in these separate categories, but not their salaries, right? And then each employee that's a member of a tech team, also receives, a premium pay for being trained and as part of that tech team. And so we do budget those premium pays in those, the hazardous materials and water and rescue categories. So again, it's one of those areas similar to training where we have some of the costs in general operations and some of the costs in these specialty programs based on their role.
But you need to be certified, right, to be one of those people?
Yes.
So you really do know how many water and rope rescue people you have,
Yes,
right? Okay.
and generally, so what, you know, there's a single station, and if you're working at that station, you're supposed to be certified in that technical rescue discipline.
Okay.
I have a question about the compression, that you have on page 30. Is the $323,000 compression loss of taxes or the value?
On school, sorry, what page?
Page 30,
That's the taxes.
$323,000 in taxes are compression?
Yeah.
Value?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, which page are you on there?
Page 30, the last sentence of the second to last paragraph says, resulting in approximately $322,000 in compression loss.
Yes. Yeah, so the compression loss on the levy, is higher, than we have on our permanent tax rate. Because the levy resulted in more properties reaching compression.
Thank you.
And one more question, I'll stop. Fleet services, can you show me where the income, where is the income reported? I said you had services that Fleet did for other people?
Yeah,
I just didn't see it on that page.
yeah, and once again, so that's in general revenues. So it would show up in, the table on page 50. And there's two lines there. Line 4,500 is our total IGA revenue. So that includes our IGAs with Sandy and Gladstone, which make up the bulk of that money. But then also the fleet IGAs that we have with Canby, Aurora, Woodland. Might be missing one, but those are also built into that 7.5 million. And then the next line there, 4,541, the sale of inventory services and equipment, also includes some revenue from that where we bill them for parts and materials that we use and take care of their apparatus, and they pay us back for that.
Is it typical budgeting procedure to put it all under one number like that, or not break it out into individuals? Like, each one, each division makes X dollars, or because obviously you've got it all combined.
Right, there's a number of ways to do it, right? But I wouldn't want to busy the budget with a separate line for each IGA, yes.
No, nor would I. But it seems to me, they're kind of disparate, things that we're dealing with there. And
Yeah, I mean, we could break it down to a fleet services, fleet IGA line versus a contract for service line. But yeah, this is how we've done it.
It just seems easier to read to me, but I mean, it's your budget. I just think it'd be easier to read for the average person looking at the budget.
Which is important, yeah.
Average people don't know what this budget, but it's on average. Joe, questions? No, okay.
So there was a couple others that were just were odd to me. There's on one of the pages, as we're flipping through, I saw corporate activity tax. And why would you be hit with that?
So there was a tax, and there was a pass a few years ago, and there was an attempt to track it. There are things in here that predate me, right? But if they have an actual expense from 21, 22 or later, we're required to keep them in the budget until that year falls off of the required reporting period.
Okay,
So that's not a cost object that we use anymore.
okay,
But that history still has to, we have to show actuals back to 21, 22. But a lot of these cost objects that say the previous administration used that I'm not fond of will drop off next
Okay.
year.
it was just a little, it was like, and then there's, I don't know if you have a match rate or even you're subject to the, Family Medical Leave Act, and is it, where is it?
It is in personnel costs. Again, if we look at page. Oh, it's in here. Which one is it? Oh, you're on there. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, yeah, 6655 on page 51.
Oh,
Right.
so that's that.
Yeah, so that's paid
Yeah.
family medical leave insurance.
Okay.
Is what that stands for. I would prefer that we change that to paid leave Oregon.
Yeah,
But yeah, so that's what that is. So that program started in September, so you can see we had funds for the first time budgeted in 23-24. And we see a pretty big increase in 24-25. And that's a couple reasons. One, 24-25 will be the first full year that we're paying for paid leave Oregon. And then the second reason is based on our experience so far this year, our third-party insurer is raising our rates to nearly the maximum, whereas this year we were getting quite a discount.
oh joy. Okay,
Hey, Mark, it's Aaron here on the Zoom. A couple questions on that same page.
Yeah,
Just looking for things that kind of don't fit the pattern of rate increases. And you already actually touched on a couple on this page, workers' comp. Charles mentioned the corporate activity tax. You just talked about that one. And one that I found kind of interesting here was just a couple line items below 7045 awards and recognitions. We go from 12,000 to 31,000. It seems like a big jump. Who's getting that trophy?
Yeah, no, so that was a discretion, that was a choice, to increase the funding for our awards and recognitions. We, through the budget cuts in recent years, had foregone, an award ceremony or made a very minimal award ceremony. This year, we changed that and, had an award ceremony in the evening, had a very good turnout. It was a good experience. On top of that, we have some costs related to, buying, the materials for that and other awards and recognition that we hand out, whether that's the challenge coins or things like that. So we wanted to be realistic and budgeted in that.
Okay, cool. The next one, kind of along the same line, page 61. And this one is firefighting supplies. We're going from 37,000 to 160,000. Big jump. That's line item 7065.
And this is for a one-time, I believe, Michael, expenditure to do some upgrades to our uniforms. You recall what else, Michael?
Oh, I have to pull our notes in there,
Yeah, we'll be able to. So yeah, so so this was a one of the requests, like I said earlier, I think to William, right? As part of our budget process, we do allow departments to request additional resources above their kind of their regular allocation. And I know that operations, obviously, one of the biggest and more important parts of our, most important parts of our organization did have several requests. And I know we funded some of them. I know with some R&D stuff and some equipment, but I don't recall everything that's in that increase. But I know it is intentional.
Okay.
We can pull that up.
Fair enough. No worries. Fair enough. Thank you.
Is there, are the academy people employees?
Yes.
Or, and so do they have to supply any of their own gear?
No,
Okay. So if there's an increase in the number that going through, then there'd be an increase in that.
yeah, and that's usually budgeted in, most of it's budgeted in the logistics. And so when we outfit a new academy, logistics meets with each individual, goes out there on the first day and hands them their equipment, their turnouts and everything like that.
And do you get 100% of them when they complete it? I mean, does everybody graduate or whatever it is and stay on board, or are they pilfered from, you know, other departments around the state or whatever?
No, not, I mean, very rarely would they be leaving, be pilfered, as you say. It's more whether they are able to complete the academy and meet the standards and graduate, right? It's not 100%. Some academies it is, but there are folks that fall out for either personal reasons or not meeting the standards.
What gets filtered are volunteers.
Mm.
Our volunteers, we're the training program for the community.
Yeah, although we're the biggest hirers of our volunteers, but yeah.
As many as we can, but. Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
would it be your pleasure to have 4 motions or just one?
I think we could take them as one. Recognizing that they are all at once. I mean.
That's fine with me.
Let's do that.
Are you ready for that?
Yes, is there any other discussion? Make sure that people on there, online. Okay. Everybody here?
Jim's good, Jim's good, Aaron's good.
All right.
I'd like to make a motion. That we approve the Clackamas Fire District 1's permanent tax rate of 2.4012 per $1,000 of assessed valuation for fiscal year 24 and 25. But we also approve Clackamas Fire District 1's voter approved local option levy rate at $0.52 per $1,000 of assessed valuation for fiscal years 24-25. That we also approve Clackamas Fire District's #1 levy for bonded debt at $2,405,250 for fiscal year 24-25. And lastly, that we also approve the fiscal year 24-25 proposed budget for Clackamas Fire District 1.
There a second?
Second.
Any additional discussion? Hearing none, then we'll take a vote if we do by
Consensus or?
let's do by roll call.
Shall we just call
Yes.
Is it only the budget committee or is it?
roll?
Everyone.
The budget committee.
Yeah.
They're
all.
considered.
Okay.
budget, yeah.
Just confirm. We'll go Jim,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Marilyn,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Charles,
Yes.
William,
Yes.
Julie,
Yeah.
Tim.
Yes.
Okay. Having, hearing from everybody, the motion is approved for all 4 items. Congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it, everybody, coming out and participating.
Mark, I have a question. I see that the trend, except for Julie, every one of the budget committee is bearded gentlemen. Why is that?
We're retired.
Everybody wants to be me.
This is,
Well, you're almost retired.
but this is progression.
Oh, is that progression?
Right, this is-
Oh, wow.
So stay on it.
One went to that chance.
That's right.
my future.
That's right.
You don't want to get on the other side of
That's
him.
right. Stay to the right.
Yeah, if there's nothing else, at 5:20 or 6:28, I will adjourn the May 16th, 2024 meeting of Clackamas Fire District 1 budget meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark. Wonderfully done, guys.
Yes,
Appreciate having number.